Rogan Hale had always been a figure of mystery in the town. No one really knew much about him, but everyone had heard stories. He lived alone in a small old house at the edge of the town where the forest began to thicken and the streets became quiet. The house looked almost abandoned, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. And yet a faint light always flickered from the windows at night. People often said that Rogan was dangerous, that he was a man who had lived through things most of them could never imagine. He never spoke to anyone unless he had to, and even then, his words were short, sharp, and deliberate. Children ran past his yard quickly, trying not to look at him, and adults would cross the street if he walked near them. Even though he never hurt anyone, his presence alone was enough to make people uneasy. What made Rogan truly terrifying to the townspeople was not just his looks or his solitude, it was his dog. Vex. Vex was a massive Belgian Malinois, a breed known for its intelligence, loyalty, and strength. But Vex was more than just a dog. He was trained, highly trained, and everyone in town believed that he could be dangerous on command. Some people claimed that Rogan had only one word to make Vex attack anyone, and that word was all it would take to bring chaos. The dog had a sharp gaze, muscles that seemed to ripple beneath his fur even when he was still, and a low growl that rumbled like distant thunder when strangers came near. People told themselves they were safe as long as they kept their distance. But the fear was always there, whispering in the back of their minds. Every bark, every glance from the yard made them imagine worst-case scenarios. It was as if Vex could read their thoughts and Rogan could control him like some shadowy force. Despite all the stories and whispers, no one really knew what Rogan did all day. Some imagined him training Vex in secret, running through impossible exercises that only a man of extraordinary skill could master. Others thought he had a violent past, maybe something from the military, because his posture and his eyes seemed so sharp and precise, like he had seen more than an ordinary person could handle. Rumors said he had been in special forces, that he had served in places most of the town couldn't even locate on a map. Whatever the truth was, people respected him from a distance, a respect laced with fear. They avoided him, they avoided his house, and they avoided looking into his yard. And yet no one could stop wondering. There was something magnetic about the way he moved, quiet but full of confidence, like a storm contained in a calm sky. The fear wasn't just about what Rogan could do, it was also about what Vex could do. The dog was enormous, even for a Belgian Malinois, with a thick coat, sharp teeth, and eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence. Townspeople told themselves that Vex could tear someone apart in seconds, though they had never seen him do anything like that. It was enough to know that Rogan had trained him for years, that the bond between the man and the dog was unbreakable, and that one word could unleash the beast. Children whispered his name like it was a curse, daring each other to get closer, but never doing it. Adults talked behind closed doors, keeping the stories alive. Each retelling, adding a little more danger, a little more mystery. The fear became a part of the town itself, as if Rogan and Vex existed not just in their neighborhood, but in their imaginations as well. Rogan, however, did not care about the rumors. He lived his life simply, quietly, and with purpose. He woke up early, trained Vex in long sessions that no one ever saw, and maintained his property with meticulous care. The fence around his yard was strong, and the yard itself was clean and organized, though wild at the edges where the forest crept in. He knew the townspeople feared him, but he also knew the reason for that fear was misunderstanding, assumptions, and imagination. Rogan understood the power of perception, and though he did not seek to intimidate anyone, he accepted that the town had already decided who he was before they had ever spoken to him. He was a man defined by the stories of others. Vex was a reflection of those stories. A living legend in their minds. Every now and then, someone would try to approach. A brave child might toss a ball too close to the fence. A delivery person might step a little too close to the gate, and for a moment, Rogan and Vex would become something out of the stories. Vex would growl, his body tense, and Rogan would stand silently, his presence commanding the situation without a word. Then, almost always, the person would retreat, hearts pounding, imagining that they had just survived a dangerous encounter. It was moments like these that strengthened the myth. People could tell themselves the truth about Rogan if they wanted, but the fear had already taken root, and it grew faster than any evidence could calm it. Despite the fear, there was a strange curiosity that lingered in the town. People wondered about the life Rogan and Vex led inside that old house. Did they train together constantly? Did Rogan speak to Vex? And did the dog understand every word? What had Rogan experienced that gave him such an aura of control and command? These questions were never answered, because Rogan never invited anyone into his life. He observed quietly, living in his own world, and yet he was always aware of the town's watchful eyes. Children would peek from behind trees. Adults would glance at the fence from their cars. And everyone would share their sightings later, as though they had seen a rare, dangerous animal. Rogan did not mind. In a way, the attention confirmed the life he had chosen, solitary, disciplined. And defined by the bond with his dog, Vex, too, seemed aware of the town's fear. He was not aggressive by nature. He simply mirrored Rogan's demeanor. When Rogan was calm, Vex was calm. When Rogan was tense, Vex was alert, muscles coiled as though ready for any challenge. People did not understand this subtlety. They only saw the growl, the bared teeth, and imagined the worst. But Rogan and Vex shared a silent understanding, one that went beyond words, commands, or stories. They existed in a world where trust, respect, and instinct shaped every action. To Rogan, Vex was more than a dog. He was a partner, a protector, and a companion who understood the unspoken truths of their shared lives. Together, they moved through the quiet streets at the edge of town, unbothered by the myths surrounding them. And so, the town's fear grew, solidified by distance, imagination, and the unknown. Rogan Hale and his dog Vex became legends of the neighborhood. People told their children stories about the man whose dog obeyed a single, mysterious command, and these stories spread like wildfire. No one knew the truth, and perhaps no one cared to know. It was enough to imagine the danger, to feel the shiver of fear when they thought of Rogan walking past. And in that quiet, lonely house at the edge of the forest, Rogan continued his life as he always had, quiet, disciplined, and aware of the power that perception alone could hold. Life at the edge of the town was quiet, almost too quiet, and Rogan Hale was used to it. His days were predictable, waking early, training Vex, maintaining the house, and keeping to his routines. The townspeople rarely approached his property, and he liked it that way. But one morning, everything began to change, though he had no idea it would. That day, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They had come from the city, seeking peace and space, away from the crowded streets and noise. Among them was Mara, a young woman who had a curiosity and fearlessness that set her apart from everyone else in town. She had heard the rumors about Rogan and Vex, like everyone else, but instead of feeling fear, she felt fascination. The stories that frightened others made her want to understand the truth. It happened on the second day after moving in. Mara had been exploring her new surroundings, walking along the edge of the town where the streets ended and the forest began. She noticed Rogan's house from a distance. The way the fence leaned slightly in one corner, and how Vex moved silently in the yard. The dog noticed her too, and immediately assumed the stance he always did when strangers approached. Tense, alert, growling low in his throat. Mara stopped for a moment, watching, but she did not run or call out. She simply continued walking slowly, curious about the massive dog and his owner. When she got close enough, she accidentally knocked over a small pile of firewood near the fence. The noise startled Vex, and he barked sharply. Rogan appeared almost immediately, stepping out from the shadows, his eyes piercing as he assessed the situation. Mara froze for a moment, aware that the man before her was the subject of so many whispered warnings in town. But instead of fear, she felt a strange calm. She looked at him and said, "Do you need help with that?" Her words were simple, yet they struck Rogan like lightning. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. People usually avoided him, crossed the street, or muttered words behind his back. Mara, however, spoke directly, without hesitation, without fear, and without any trace of judgment. Rogan's hand remained at his side, and Vex paused mid-growl, tilting his head in confusion. The dog had never encountered someone who approached him with neither fear nor aggression. He sniffed the air carefully, his body tense but uncertain, while Rogan studied Mara closely. It was as though the world had shifted for a moment, the tension that always existed between Rogan. Vex and the outside world had been interrupted by someone who refused to play by the unspoken rules. Mara bent down carefully and picked up the firewood, offering it to Rogan with a small smile. She didn't make sudden movements or raise her voice, and she didn't show the nervous energy most people displayed around him. Rogan noticed this, his military instincts alert but untested by her presence. He was accustomed to controlling every situation, to commanding both attention and obedience. But Mara did not act like she was trying to challenge him. She simply acted like a human being, treating him with respect instead of fear. It was unfamiliar and disarming. Vex, sensing this, relaxed slightly, stepping back and lowering his hackles. Rogan's eyes softened just a fraction, and for the first time in years, he felt the odd sensation of curiosity instead of suspicion. They began to talk cautiously. Mara asking questions about the fence, about Vex, and about the property. Rogan's answers were short at first, clipped and wary. He didn't like talking to strangers, especially not those who ignored the rumors surrounding him. Yet Mara's questions were honest, practical, and kind. She was not there to test him or provoke him. She genuinely wanted to understand. Rogan realized she had a patience and courage that no one else had ever shown. Most people's fear made them hasty, nervous, or even disrespectful. But Mara seemed unaffected by the intimidating presence of him or the massive dog at his side. This intrigued him. He had long ago built walls around himself, walls of solitude and mistrust. But here was someone who didn't knock against them in fear or challenge. Over the next few days, Mara continued to stop by. Each encounter was brief, often only a few words exchanged as she passed by on her walks. But each one chipped away at the image Rogan had of the town and its people. Mara asked questions not out of judgment, but out of curiosity. She asked why Vex was so well trained, how Rogan managed to live alone with such a large dog, and even how he had come to live in this isolated area. Rogan answered minimally, still wary of letting anyone get too close, yet he felt a strange relief in speaking to someone who didn't recoil at his presence. Vex, too, became increasingly calm around her. The dog, who had always been reactive to strangers, now walked alongside Rogan with a more relaxed gait whenever Mara was nearby. The change was subtle, but Rogan noticed it immediately. Fearlessness affected both man and dog in ways no one in the town had been able to. It wasn't just the calmness that intrigued Rogan, it was her perspective. Mara seemed to see things as they were, without the exaggerations of rumor or the distortion of fear. She noticed that Vex's growl was not one of aggression, but of uncertainty and self-protection. She observed that Rogan's stern expression and commanding presence were not signs of danger, but of discipline and care. In many ways, she understood the unspoken language between man and dog better than the townspeople ever could. Rogan realized that her presence and the way she approached him challenged everything he had believed about people. For years, he had expected fear, avoidance, and gossip. Mara gave him something entirely different: respect, attention, and genuine interest. This simple series of encounters began to change the pattern of Rogan's life, where he had always assumed isolation was safety. He now experienced a glimpse of connection that did not compromise his boundaries. Mara became a bridge between the outside world and his carefully constructed life. For the first time, he wondered if it was possible for someone to approach him without fear and yet remain safe. Vex, sensing his master's contemplative mood, grew calmer with each visit. The bond between the three, the man, the dog, and the brave newcomer, began to form, silent but powerful. It was as if Mara's simple act of walking up to the house and speaking had broken a spell that had kept Rogan trapped in fear and solitude, even though he had never admitted it to anyone. Rogan also began to observe Mara in a different light. She was practical, aware, and unafraid to act. She didn't make mistakes out of naivety. She approached the unknown with respect and attention. Her courage was not reckless, it was steady, calculated, and genuine. She asked questions, offered help, and showed kindness without compromising herself. Rogan felt a mixture of curiosity and admiration. He realized that someone like her could see the truth beneath the fear. The truth about Vex, and perhaps even the truth about him. This realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. For years, he had built his reputation on fear and distance. Now, someone was quietly dismantling that reputation simply by refusing to fear him. By the end of the week, Rogan found himself waiting, almost unconsciously, for Mara's walks. He noticed when she passed by, looking forward to the brief conversations, to the calm presence she brought, and to the subtle ways she interacted with Vex, the dog, who had once been a symbol of intimidation, now behaved differently around her, responding to her presence with curiosity instead of alertness. Rogan realized that Mara's fearlessness had introduced a new dynamic into his life, one that was unfamiliar but comforting. For the first time in years, he saw the possibility of connection without danger, of trust without compromise, and of human kindness in a place where he had expected only fear. As the days passed, Rogan began to realize that Mara's presence was more than just a simple interruption to his routine. She brought a light into his life that he had not noticed he had been missing. Her fearlessness had already begun to calm Vex, and now she seemed determined to understand the real story behind the dog, behind Rogan and behind the rumors that had followed him for years. One afternoon, Mara lingered near the edge of the yard, asking questions with genuine curiosity. She wanted to know about Vex's training, how Rogan had come to live in isolation, and why the townspeople feared them both. Rogan had always been careful not to reveal too much. Trust did not come easily to him, and he had built his life on solitude and discipline. Yet something about Mara made him consider opening up. Even if only a little. It started with Vex. Mara noticed that the dog, despite his size and sharp appearance, was not naturally aggressive. She had observed him for several days, paying close attention to his body language, his movements, and the way he reacted to her presence. Unlike the townspeople, she did not assume that growling and barking meant danger. Instead, she saw that Vex's behavior was defensive, almost protective, and that he responded to Rogan's voice and gestures with immediate obedience. Mara asked Rogan why Vex had been trained so strictly, and she listened carefully when he finally began to explain. His words were sparse at first, cautious and careful, but as he spoke, a story began to emerge, a story that no one in the town had ever heard. Vex had once been a Sir Chandraskew dog, a highly skilled one trained to enter dangerous areas to find people who were lost or trapped. Rogan had been his handler during missions that took them into disaster zones, areas devastated by fire, flood, or structural collapse. Vex had learned to work under extreme pressure, to respond instantly to Rogan's commands, and to handle situations most people could not imagine. But during one particularly harrowing mission, everything went wrong. There had been a building collapse, people trapped inside, and an explosion that left Rogan and Vex shaken to their core. Vex had survived, but he had experienced trauma. His instincts became hyper-alert, his reactions sharper, and Rogan, recognizing the signs of stress, realized that he needed to train Vex in a new way. The dog needed a way to return to safety, to recover from panic, and to trust that the world was not always a threat. This was when Rogan developed the single command that everyone in town had misinterpreted. It was not a command to attack, but a command to come home to find safety in Rogan's presence. Mara listened carefully, her eyes wide as she began to understand. The dog everyone feared was not a monster. He was a survivor. Rogan had spent years training Vex not to hurt others, but to stay calm and controlled, even in situations that would terrify most humans. The command, simple and unassuming, was a lifeline, a way for Vex to reconnect with stability whenever fear threatened to overwhelm him. Mara realized that the townspeople had been completely wrong in their assumptions. They had seen only the outward signs: muscles, growls, sharp teeth, and they had built legends of danger around a dog that had been through trauma and needed care and understanding. Vex's obedience was not a tool for intimidation. It was a reflection of Rogan's discipline, patience, and compassion. As Mara spent more time observing Rogan and Vex, she also began to see the man behind the reputation. Rogan was not cold or cruel. He was disciplined, careful, and deeply protective of the life he shared with Vex. His quiet exterior hid a man who had been shaped by experiences that most people could not comprehend. Mara asked him about his military service, about the missions he had undertaken, and about the moments that had left scars on both him and Vex. Rogan answered cautiously, never revealing every detail, but enough for Mara to understand that his strictness with the dog was a form of care, not control. He had learned that trust and discipline were the only ways to help a dog like Vex navigate a world that could be overwhelming and dangerous. Mara saw this, and she began to respect not just the dog, but the man who had dedicated himself to Vex's well-being. Vex began to respond differently as Mara's understanding grew. The dog had always been able to sense fear, tension, and uncertainty, and he had reacted accordingly. But Mara's calm presence, combined with her genuine interest in him and Rogan, changed the dynamic. Vex no longer growled or barked unnecessarily. He walked alongside Mara with curiosity, occasionally sniffing her hand or watching her carefully. He seemed to sense that she did not pose a threat, that she understood him in a way few others could. Rogan noticed this subtle change, and it filled him with a quiet sense of relief. For years, he had lived with the tension of public fear and the constant need to protect Vex from strangers who did not understand. Now, with Mara, there was a moment of clarity. Someone could approach them without fear, and the world did not have to be a constant battlefield. This revelation was powerful for Rogan. He had built walls around himself not just to keep people out, but to keep the world manageable. Fear had become a protective tool, a way to control interactions with others. Yet Mara's presence challenged that worldview. She approached with respect, courage, and intelligence, refusing to participate in the myths that surrounded him. Her actions forced Rogan to reconsider his assumptions about human nature and about the possibility of connection. The bond between man and dog, once a source of isolation, now became a bridge. Mara's understanding created a space where Rogan could begin to consider trust, not as a weakness but as a necessary part of life. Over time, Mara's curiosity led her to ask even more pointed questions. She wanted to know about the single command, about Vex's behavior, and about the relationship between the two of them. Rogan explained slowly, carefully, finally revealed the truth. The command that everyone in town feared was a command for safety. It was a way for Vex to come back to him when panic set in, to find calm and reassurance in Rogan's presence. Mara's eyes widened as she realized the irony. The townspeople's fear had been completely misplaced. They had interpreted survival training and deep care as a threat. Rogan and Vex, who had been seen as dangerous, were in fact a model of discipline, understanding, and compassion. The truth was far more extraordinary than the rumors. This understanding began to change the dynamic in subtle ways. Rogan found himself watching Mara's interactions, noting how she moved, how she spoke, how she treated Vex. He realized that her fearlessness and her intelligence were rare qualities. She did not approach recklessly. She approached thoughtfully, with awareness and caution, but without fear. For the first time in a long time, Rogan considered the possibility of letting someone into his world, of allowing a connection that did not rely on tension or control. Vex, sensing the change in Rogan, became even more relaxed around Mara. The dog's instincts, honed over years of training, recognized the shift. Mara was not a threat. She was someone who could be trusted. As the days passed, the bond between the three strengthened, silent but profound. Mara's understanding of Vex's past, her respect for Rogan's discipline, and her fearlessness created a new reality for them all. The myths and rumors of danger no longer dominated their interactions. Instead, curiosity, trust, and subtle care shaped their relationships. Rogan began to appreciate the value of connection and observation. Realizing that Mara had changed his perspective on the world, Vex, once a symbol of fear, became a bridge of understanding between Rogan and the newcomer. And Mara, with her gentle courage, had uncovered the truth behind the stories, that the man and the dog everyone feared were not monsters, but survivors, partners, and protectors, bound together by trust and experience at EXT. The calm and quiet days that had begun to form around Rogan, Vex, and Mara were soon disrupted in a way no one had expected. The town's fear, built over years of rumor and imagination, had not disappeared. Most people still avoided Rogan's house, and children whispered tales of the dangerous dog and its master as though they were legends. The stories had grown over time, becoming exaggerated versions of reality. People had never stopped to consider what they did not understand. Mara, however, had begun to notice just how much this fear controlled the town, shaping their actions and reactions. She knew that sooner or later this misunderstanding would lead to trouble. She was right. It started with a group of teenagers. Like most young people, they were drawn to danger, adventure, and the thrill of testing limits. Hearing the stories about Rogan and Vex, they decided to make a video for social media bravery challenge meant to prove their courage. They wanted to get as close as possible to Rogan's yard without actually being caught, imagining that the dog would bark or growl, and that they could somehow capture this monster on camera. The teenagers approached in the late afternoon, sneaking along the edge of the yard while whispering excitedly to each other. Mara, who had been walking nearby, saw them immediately. She knew what was about to happen, and she could feel the tension rise in Vex long before the teenagers reached the gate. The dog's hackles rose, his ears flicked forward, and a low, warning growl began to rattle in his throat. He was alert, ready to respond, and instinctively protective of Rogan and the territory they shared. When the teenagers got close enough, one of them, emboldened by the excitement, decided to step even closer, pointing a camera at Vex while making sudden movements. The dog froze for a moment, sensing a threat, and then barked loudly, taking a step forward. Panic spread through the group instantly. They had expected a dramatic reaction, but they had not anticipated the intensity of Vex's response. Vex was not attacking out of aggression. He was reacting to fear and chaos. He was confused, unsure whether the humans meant harm or were simply reckless. Rogan appeared quickly, stepping out from the shadows, his voice firm and calm as he called for Vex to stand down. The dog hesitated, growling softly, looking from Rogan to the intruders and back again. Mara, seeing the situation escalate, ran forward to intervene. She placed herself between the teenagers and the dog, raising her hands calmly and speaking firmly. "Stop. Don't provoke him," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. Vex paused, tilting his head as he listened, recognizing the calm authority in her tone. Mara's presence, combined with Rogan's command, helped diffuse the situation, but the teenagers were terrified. They had never expected someone to step in so fearlessly. They did not understand that Mara was not challenging Vex. She was guiding him, showing the dog that they were not a threat. Slowly, the teenagers backed away, hearts pounding, realizing that they had misjudged the situation entirely. They had come seeking drama and excitement, but they had walked right into the world of a man and his dog, where discipline and understanding governed behavior rather than fear and aggression. After the teenagers left, Mara stayed behind with Rogan and Vex, helping to calm the dog down. Vex, still alert, sniffed the air and listened to Rogan's commands. Mara could see how trained he was, how quickly he responded to subtle gestures, and how much he trusted Rogan. She realized that the townspeople's fear had been misplaced all along. Vex's behavior was not a sign of danger. It was a reflection of training, discipline, and survival instincts honed over years of rigorous work. Rogan, for his part, watched Mara with a mixture of relief and admiration. She had understood the situation instantly, acted without fear, and helped prevent a disaster that could have ended badly if the teenagers had continued to provoke the dog. This incident highlighted just how fragile the town's perception of Rogan and Vex really was. Word of the encounter spread quickly. The teenagers, shaken and embarrassed, shared their story online. Painting a picture of chaos and danger that exaggerated their fear, some neighbors, who had witnessed parts of the event from a distance, added their own versions of what had happened. As always, the story grew in the retelling. Yet in the midst of this chaos, Mara understood the truth. She knew that Rogan and Vex were not dangerous in the way people imagined. They were misunderstood. The fear that had dominated the town's perception of them was based on assumptions, not reality. Mara's intervention had prevented harm, but it also gave her a clearer understanding of the challenges Rogan faced daily. The town was quick to judge, slow to understand, and its fear was a powerful, almost uncontrollable force. This event also forced Rogan to confront his own feelings about the town. For years, he had assumed that fear kept him safe, that distance and isolation were the only ways to protect himself and Vex. But the encounter with the teenagers and Mara's calm, fearless response revealed a different perspective. Fear could not always be controlled, and assumptions could be dangerous. Rogan began to see that trust, clear communication, and careful observation were more powerful tools than intimidation. Mara had shown him that understanding and courage could defuse even the most tense situations. Vex had responded to her presence, demonstrating that the dog, too, could differentiate between threat and trust. This realization was profound for Rogan. It suggested a future where he might not have to live in constant tension and suspicion. Over the following days, Mara and Rogan reflected on the incident together. They talked quietly, discussing Vex's training, the dog's reactions, and how fear could shape human behavior. Rogan began to see the value of Mara's perspective, not just in this incident, but in her consistent ability to see beyond appearances. He realized that the town's fear had been more dangerous than Vex ever could have been. Misunderstanding and assumption had the power to create chaos, and Mara had helped him navigate it. He felt a growing trust in her, and a realization that her influence could help reshape the way he and Vex were perceived by others. It was a slow process, but this incident marked the beginning of that change. Meanwhile, Vex's behavior continued to evolve. The dog, who had been conditioned to react strongly to strangers, began to show more flexibility. Mara's presence had demonstrated that not all humans were threats. Rogan watched as Vex relaxed slightly when she approached, responding to subtle cues rather than defaulting to aggression. This shift was significant. It showed that even a dog trained under extreme conditions could adapt when met with understanding and calm authority. Rogan realized that this same approach could extend to the townspeople, though it would take patience, observation, and careful guidance. The incident with the teenagers had not just been a test of Vex's training, but a lesson in perception, trust, and the power of calm, confident intervention by the end of the week. Rogan understood that the town's fear was not something he could ignore. He also realized that he had allies in Mara, someone who could see the truth behind appearances and help guide interactions to prevent unnecessary conflict. He began to consider ways to change perceptions gradually, knowing that trust, once earned, could replace fear. Vex, now more relaxed and aware of Mara's presence, demonstrated the potential for this change. The experience had taught Rogan a valuable lesson. Fear could be contagious, but so could understanding. Mara had shown him that courage, calmness, and insight could diffuse tension faster than intimidation or isolation ever could. The encounter with the teenagers, while tense and alarming, became a turning point. It revealed the fragility of fear, the strength of understanding, and the potential for connection. Rogan and Vex had survived the test, but more importantly, they had demonstrated the power of calm, authority, and trust. Mara had been the key to this outcome, guiding the situation with intelligence and courage. For the first time, Rogan realized that his life at the edge of the town could be different, not defined solely by fear and distance, but by careful understanding and selective trust. The incident had proven that perception could be challenged, that fear could be managed, and that even in a town built on rumor and legend, the truth had the power to shine through. The days following the confrontation with the teenagers brought a strange calm to Rogan's life. The incident had shaken the town's perception, but it also highlighted something Rogan had never fully realized: the true value of trust, calm authority, and understanding. Mara's presence had transformed not just Vex's behavior, but Rogan's outlook on human nature. He began to see that fear, while protective, was not the only way to navigate life. Patience, observation, and connection could be equally powerful. But the ultimate test of everything Rogan had learned on to Vex's training was still to come. It arrived in a way that no one could have predicted, in the form of a sudden emergency that demanded courage, intelligence, and trust. It happened one afternoon when the sky had darkened with smoke from a nearby fire. The town had been alerted, and emergency services were responding. But a child had gone missing near the outskirts of the forest that bordered Rogan's property. Panic spread quickly as neighbors searched frantically and parents feared the worst. Mara, who had been walking nearby, immediately thought of Rogan and Vex. She knew that if anyone could handle such a situation, it was the man who had trained his dog under the most extreme circumstances. Without hesitation, she ran toward his house, calling out his name. Rogan, hearing the urgency in her voice, felt the familiar surge of focus. There was no time for hesitation. This was a moment that demanded action, not fear or speculation. Rogan grabbed his gear. Vex, alert and ready, followed him immediately. The dog's instincts kicked in, honed over years of training in disaster zones. Mara stayed nearby, guiding them to the area where the child had been last seen. Smoke choked the air, and visibility was low, making it difficult to navigate. But Rogan and Vex worked seamlessly together. Vex moved with purpose, sniffing the ground, listening intently, and responding instantly to Rogan's commands. The bond between them, strengthened by years of training and experience, allowed them to operate with a fluidity that was almost instinctual. Mara watched in awe as the two moved like a single unit, a team shaped by trust and discipline. Moving through danger that would have paralyzed most people, minutes felt like hours as they searched. But Vex remained steady, guided by the single command that had always ensured his focus and safety. Rogan used the command carefully, calming Vex when panic threatened to rise, ensuring that the dog remained effective and precise. Mara realized the true power of the bond between man and dog. The command, which the townspeople had feared for years, was not about control or aggression. It was a tool for survival, a way to maintain focus, discipline, and safety in the face of extreme danger. Vex responded instantly, moving carefully through smoke and debris, guided by Rogan's hand and voice. Each step was calculated, each decision precise. Reflecting the years of training and the deep understanding between them, finally, after what felt like an eternity, Vex froze and barked sharply, signaling that he had found something. Rogan rushed forward, following the dog's precise movements, and discovered the child trapped behind a fallen tree, coughing and frightened. Rogan quickly assessed the situation, ensuring the child was unharmed, and then used the familiar command to guide Vex and the child back to safety. Vex, obedient and steady, followed immediately, moving with purpose and precision. Mara ran alongside, helping to clear obstacles and providing reassurance to the terrified child. It was a moment that crystallized everything Rogan had taught Vex. Everything Mara had helped him realize about trust, courage, and understanding. Together, they had turned a potentially tragic situation into a rescue that would be remembered for years. The townspeople, who had arrived at the scene after hearing the commotion, watched in awe. The man they had feared, and the dog they had imagined as a monster, had saved a life. The legends of danger and aggression were shattered in an instant. What had once been fear was now replaced with admiration and respect. People realized that they had misjudged Rogan and Vex for years, letting rumor and imagination dictate their perceptions. The rescue demonstrated the truth, the dog's obedience, the man's discipline, and the calm, fearless approach of Mara had turned a chaotic situation into a story of courage and skill. The town witnessed firsthand that appearances could be deceiving, and that understanding and trust were far more powerful than fear. After the rescue, Rogan finally spoke openly with Mara. He explained the reasoning behind Vex's training, the trauma the dog had endured, and how the single command had been a lifeline, not a weapon. Mara listened quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and understanding. She realized that the command had saved a life that day, just as it had helped Vex navigate countless stressful situations in the past. Rogan also acknowledged that Mara's presence had been crucial not just for her practical help, but for the calm and understanding she had brought to the situation. For the first time in years, Rogan felt a deep sense of connection to another human being, someone who truly understood him and Vex. It was a moment of revelation, not just for him, but for the dog as well. The town's perspective began to shift almost immediately. Neighbors who had long avoided Rogan's house now approached him cautiously, curious to learn more about the man who had saved a child. They asked questions, listened to his explanations, and began to see Vex not as a monster but as a highly trained and loyal companion. The rescue became a turning point, not only in the town's perception, but in Rogan's life. He realized that isolation and fear were no longer necessary. Understanding, patience, and careful trust could create connection without compromising safety. Mara's courage and insight had been the catalyst for this change, helping him see that the world could be navigated differently than he had believed for so long. Vex, too, experienced a transformation. The dog, who had spent years reacting to fear and tension, now moved confidently among the townspeople. He remained alert, as any well-trained dog should, but there was no unnecessary aggression. Vex had proven his loyalty, discipline, and skill, demonstrating the power of training rooted in trust and care rather than intimidation. Rogan watched proudly as the dog that had been feared for years became a symbol of courage and protection. The relationship between man and dog, once the subject of whispered rumors, was now understood and respected by the community in the aftermath. Rogan and Mara reflected on everything that had happened. The incident had tested not only Vex's training, but the bonds of trust between human and dog, between Rogan and Mara, and between the misunderstood man and the town. Mara's unwavering courage had allowed Rogan and Vex to shine in a way that rumors never could. The town had witnessed the truth, and for the first time, Rogan felt that he could live among others without the constant weight of fear and suspicion. The single command, once feared as a weapon, had revealed itself as a tool of life, safety, and connection. Rogan understood that his life, once defined by distance and rumor, could now be enriched by trust and understanding. From that day on, things began to change gradually, but surely. The townspeople approached Rogan with curiosity instead of fear. Children, once terrified, now watched Vex with admiration, understanding that he was trained and loyal, not dangerous. Mara continued to walk and talk with Rogan, bridging the gap between the man at the edge of the town and the community that had once feared him. Rogan began to see the value of connection, patience, and courage in ways he had never considered. Vex remained his constant companion, a living symbol of discipline, loyalty, and the power of trust. Together, the three of them had not only saved a child, but had reshaped the town's understanding, proving that courage, understanding, careful guidance could overcome fear and myth.